The whiskey bottle shattered against the wall 3 feet from where Nora Fletcher stood, and she knew before her father even opened his mouth that something terrible had happened to her brother. It was the summer of 1873 in Ordway, Colorado, a dusty settlement that clung to existence on the edge of the prairie like a tick on a dog's back. The town consisted of little more than a general store, a saloon that never closed, a blacksmith shop, and a handful of weathered buildings that housed families trying to scratch out lives from the unforgiving earth. Nora had lived here for all 22 years of her life, watching her mother waste away from fever when she was 12, and then watching her father drown his grief in liquor until he became more ghost than man. But this was different. Her father, George Fletcher, stood swaying in the doorway of their cramped 2-room house, his eyes wild and red-rimmed, his hands trembling as he reached for another bottle on the rickety table. Nora's younger brother Timothy, just 17 years old with the gangly limbs of youth and eyes that still held hope despite their circumstances, was nowhere to be seen. "Where is Timothy?" Nora demanded, her voice steady even as her heart began to race. She was a tall woman, lean from hard work and scarce meals, with dark hair that she kept braided down her back and gray eyes that had learned to hide fear behind steel. Her father laughed, a sound like gravel scraping against tin. "Gone. The boy's gone." "Gone where?" Nora stepped forward, her calico dress swirling around her ankles, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "San Francisco, maybe farther. What does it matter?" George Fletcher took a long pull from the bottle, whiskey dribbling down his stubbled chin. "Got us $200 for him. More money than we'd see in 5 years of breaking our backs on this worthless land." The words hit Nora like a physical blow. "What did you do?" "Sold him." Her father said it so casually, as if he were discussing the sale of a horse or a piece of furniture. "Man came through town looking for workers, strong young men to work the gold fields in California or maybe the docks. I don't remember. Signed the papers this morning. Timothy left on the afternoon stage." Nora's vision blurred at the edges. She had heard of such things, of course. Men desperate for labor would buy up the contracts of young workers, essentially purchasing years of their lives for a lump, some paid to a parent or guardian. It was legal, technically, though it walked a razor's edge between employment and slavery. The young men who signed such contracts, or had them signed on their behalf, often disappeared into mines or ships or distant cities, working 16-hour days for nothing but bare subsistence until their contracts expired, if they survived that long. "You will get him back," Nora said, her voice low and dangerous. "You will go after that stage and you will bring Timothy home." Her father laughed again. "With what? I already spent most of the money, paid off our debts to Henderson at the general store, bought 3 cases of good whiskey. The rest is going to see me through the winter comfortable like." Nora looked at the man who had given her life and felt nothing but contempt. "Then I will go." "You?" George Fletcher's eyes focused on her for the first time, really seeing her. "You're a woman alone. You would not make it 10 miles before some drifter took advantage, or the Cheyenne found you, or you died of thirst on the prairie. Besides, you have no money for a stage ticket, no horse, nothing. I will find a way." Nora turned and walked to the small trunk at the foot of her narrow bed. Inside were her few possessions. 2 other dresses, her mother's Bible, a silver brush that had been a gift on her 16th birthday, and a small leather pouch containing exactly $14.30 that she had saved over the past 3 years from selling eggs and doing laundry for the more prosperous families in town. $14 would not get her to California. It would barely get her to Denver. But she would start there, and she would find a way forward, because Timothy was all she had in this world that mattered. Her baby brother, with his quick smile and his dreams of becoming a schoolteacher someday, was out there being hauled across the continent like cargo, and she would be damned before she let him disappear into whatever hell her father had sold him into. She changed into her sturdiest dress, packed her few belongings into a canvas sack, and tucked her money into a pocket she had sewn into the inside of her bodice. Her father watched her with bleary eyes but made no move to stop her. Perhaps some small part of him, buried deep beneath the alcohol and despair, was glad someone cared enough to try. The man's name was Rufus Tate, George Fletcher said as Nora reached the door. His voice was quieter now, almost sober. He works for the Pacific Labor Company, that's all I know. Nora nodded once and stepped out into the blazing afternoon sun. She had no plan, no real idea of how she would cross the nearly 1,000 miles between Ordway and San Francisco, but she knew she had to try. Timothy was somewhere out there, scared and alone, and she was the only person in the world who would come for him. The general store was her first stop. Samuel Henderson, a portly man with shrewd eyes and a nose for profit, looked up from his ledger as she entered. "Miss Fletcher, I heard your father finally settled his account." "I need information," Nora said, ignoring the comment. "The Pacific Labor Company, what do you know about them?" Henderson scratched his chin. "Not much. They come through every few months, recruiting workers for the railroads or the mines. Pay cash for able-bodied young men willing to sign contracts. It's legal enough, though I would not want to be one of those boys. They work them near to death, from what I hear. Where do they take them? Depends. Could be the silver mines in Nevada. Could be the railroad camps in the Sierra Nevada. Could be the shipping yards in San Francisco. The contracts usually run for 3 years, and the companies move the workers around as needed. Once a boy signs, he belongs to them until the term is up or he dies, whichever comes first." Nora felt her stomach turn. "How would I find someone? If I knew the company name and had a description of the boy," Henderson's expression softened slightly. "You're going after your brother." "I am." "Miss Fletcher, I will tell you straight because your mother was a good woman and you deserve honesty. Your chances of finding him are slim to none. These companies handle hundreds of workers. They move them around, change their names sometimes, split up families deliberate-like to prevent escapes. And even if you found him, the contract your father signed is legal. The company owns Timothy's labor for the next 3 years, and they will not give him up without getting their money back, plus interest. How much would that be? More than you have, I would wager. Maybe $300, maybe more. And that's assuming they are willing to negotiate at all, which most are not. $300. It might as well have been $3 million. Nora had never seen that much money in one place in her entire life. But she kept her spine straight and her voice level. "Is there anyone in town who might help me? Anyone who knows about the labor companies or has connections out west?" Henderson considered this for a long moment. "There's a man who came through last week, calls himself Isaac Tanner. He is a bounty hunter of sorts, though he mostly tracks down escaped workers for the labor companies and brings them back. If anyone knows how these outfits operate, it would be him. He is staying at the rooming house above the saloon." A bounty hunter who worked for the very people who had taken Timothy. It was not ideal, but it was something. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Miss Fletcher." The shopkeeper's voice stopped her at the door. "I will pray for you. You are going to need it." The rooming house was accessed by an exterior staircase that climbed the side of the saloon, creaking ominously with each step. Nora had never been up here before. Respectable women did not visit the rooms above saloons, where drifters and gamblers and worse rented beds by the night. But respectability would not bring Timothy home. She knocked on the third door, the one the bartender had pointed to when she asked after Isaac Tanner. For a long moment, there was no response, and then a voice called out, "It is open." Nora pushed the door inward and found herself in a small, sparse room containing a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair. The man sitting on the edge of the bed was younger than she expected, perhaps 28 or 30, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of aged whiskey. He was cleaning a revolver with a practiced ease that spoke of long familiarity, and he barely glanced up as she entered. "If you are looking for work of a certain nature, you have the wrong room," he said, his voice carrying a hint of the South in its vowels. Nora felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her composure. "I am looking for Isaac Tanner. You found him." Now he did look up, and something in his expression shifted when he saw her face, taking in the determination in her eyes and the set of her jaw. "Though I am guessing you are not here to hire me for my usual services. I need information about the Pacific Labor Company." Tanner set down the revolver and gave her his full attention. "That is a specific request. What is your interest in Pacific?" "They took my brother. My father sold his contract yesterday and he left on the afternoon stage. I need to find him and bring him home." Something flickered across Tanner's face, too quick to read, and then it was gone behind a mask of professional neutrality. "If your father signed the contract, then it is legal. The company owns your brother's labor for the term agreed upon. There is nothing you can do. I can buy out the contract. You have $300. "No, but I will get it." Tanner stood, revealing a lean, muscular build and a height that put him several inches over 6 feet. He moved to the washstand and poured water from a chipped pitcher into the basin, washing his hands with methodical care. "Miss, I do not know what fairy tales you have been telling yourself, but let me give you the truth plain. Your brother is gone. He is going to spend the next 3 years breaking his back in a mine or on a railroad gang, and there is a better than even chance he will not survive it. The companies do not care about the workers. They use them up and toss them aside. If you try to follow him, you will end up in a situation far worse than what he is facing. Go home, mourn your brother, move on with your life." "No." The word came out sharp and definite. "I am going after him with or without your help." "But I thought you might be willing to tell me how to find him since you work for these companies." "I track down escaped workers. I do not get involved in contract disputes." "Then tell me how to track someone. Tell me how the system works, how they move people, where they take them. Give me something I can use." Tanner dried his hands on a threadbare towel and turned to face her fully. In the dim light of the room, she could see a scar running along his jawline and another disappearing into his collar. This was a man who had seen violence and survived it. "Why would I help you?" "Because I will pay you. You just said you do not have $300. I do not. But I have $14 and I will give you half of it for information." Tanner laughed, a sound with more bitterness than humor in it. $7. "That is what your brother's freedom is worth to you," Nora's eyes flashed. "That is everything I have in the world. Every penny I have saved over 3 years of scrubbing floors and washing other people's clothes. If I had more, I would offer it. But I do not, so $7 is what I can pay. And I am asking you, as one human being to another, to help me find my brother before he disappears forever." The room fell silent except for the distant sounds of the saloon below, men laughing and glasses clinking, and a piano playing something jaunty and off-key. Tanner studied her for a long moment, and Nora met his gaze without flinching, letting him see the desperation and determination she felt in equal measure. Finally, he sighed. "Keep your $7. I will tell you what I know, but I will not promise it will help." Relief washed through Nora so intensely she nearly swayed. "Thank you," Do not thank me yet." Tanner moved to the chair and gestured for her to sit on the bed. When she hesitated, he said, "I am not going to hurt you. If I wanted to do that, I would have done it already. Sit down before you fall down. You look like you have not eaten today." It was true. In the shock of discovering what her father had done, food had been the last thing on her mind. Nora perched on the edge of the bed, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. Tanner leaned against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. Pacific Labor Company is one of the bigger outfits. They have contracts with half a dozen mining operations in Nevada and California, plus the railroad companies that are still pushing lines through the mountains. When they buy up a batch of workers, they usually take them to a central processing facility in Sacramento. That is where they sort them out, decide who goes where based on age and strength and any skills they might have. From Sacramento, they get shipped to whatever job site needs bodies at the moment. How long does that take? The processing? A week, maybe two. They have to wait until they have enough workers to make the transport worthwhile. Your brother left yesterday, so he is probably still en route to Sacramento. The stage route goes through Denver, then over the mountains to Salt Lake City, then down to Sacramento. If he is traveling with a labor agent, they might take a more direct route overland, but either way, it is a good 2 weeks of travel. So I have time to catch up. Maybe. But even if you reach Sacramento, getting into the processing facility is another matter. They do not let just anyone wander in. The workers are valuable property, and the companies guard them accordingly. Nora absorbed this information, her mind already racing ahead. What is the fastest way to Sacramento from here? Stage, if you can afford it. It will run you about $50 for a ticket. You could try going by wagon train, but those are slower, and you would have to wait for one to form up, which could take weeks. Or you could ride if you have a horse, but a woman alone on the trail is asking for trouble. $50. Nora wanted to scream at the impossibility of it all. Instead, she asked, "What if I worked along the way? Took jobs in the towns between here and Sacramento, saved up money as I traveled? That would take months." Your brother would be long gone from Sacramento by then, shipped off to some mine in the middle of nowhere. "Then, what do you suggest I do?" Tanner was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was gentler. "I suggest you accept that this is a fight you cannot win. I know that is not what you want to hear, but it is the truth. The Pacific Labor Company has lawyers and contracts and the law on their side. You have $14 and good intentions. That is not enough." Nora stood, smoothing down her skirt with hands that barely trembled. "Thank you for the information, Mr. Tanner. I will not take up any more of your time." "Wait." He pushed off from the wall, something shifting in his expression. "Where are you going?" "To Denver. I will walk if I have to. Once I am there, I will find work and earn money for the next leg of the journey. It may take time, but I will not stop until I reach Sacramento and find my brother. You will die before you make it out of Colorado. The prairie is not kind to lone travelers, especially women. And even if you survive the journey, you have no plan for what you will do when you reach Sacramento. Then I will figure it out when I get there." Nora moved toward the door, but Tanner stepped into her path. "Hold on. Just hold on a moment." He rubbed a hand over his face, and Nora saw exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. "I have a proposition for you. I am heading west in 2 days. I have business in Salt Lake City, and I will be passing through Denver on the way. I can take you as far as Salt Lake if you are willing to earn your passage." "How?" "I need someone to handle the cooking and camp chores while we travel. I was planning to do it myself, but if you are willing to work, I will provide transportation and food. Once we reach Salt Lake City, We can discuss whether it makes sense to continue on together to Sacramento." It was more than Nora had hoped for, but she was not naive enough to accept without understanding the terms. "What exactly would you expect from me?" Tanner met her eyes steadily. "I expect you to cook 3 meals a day, maintain the camp, and handle any mending or laundry that needs doing. That is all. I am not going to touch you or proposition you or ask for anything beyond what I just stated. I know what you are thinking, and I do not blame you for it, but I give you my word as a man of honor that I will respect your person and your privacy. Why would you do this? What do you gain, honestly? I am tired of my own cooking, and I am tired of traveling alone. And maybe I am feeling charitable because I had a younger brother once, and I know what it is like to lose family." He said it simply, without self-pity, but Nora heard the old pain beneath the words. She considered the offer from every angle she could think of. Traveling alone with a strange man was dangerous, but so was traveling alone, period. At least with Tanner, she would make it to Salt Lake City, which was a good halfway point to Sacramento. And something in his eyes, some fundamental decency beneath the hard exterior, made her believe he would keep his word. "I accept," she said. "When do we leave?" "Day after tomorrow, Dawn. Meet me at the livery stable, and Miss Fletcher, bring warm clothes. We will be crossing through the mountains, and the nights get cold even in summer." Nora spent the next day preparing for the journey. She traded her silver brush to Mrs. Henderson for a thick wool shawl and a pair of sturdy boots that fit better than her worn-out shoes. She packed dried beef and hardtack from the general store, using up most of her remaining money, and filled a canteen with fresh water from the town well. Her father watched her preparations with the detached interest of a man observing a stranger, and when she left before dawn on the second day, he did not say goodbye. The livery stable was quiet in the pre-dawn darkness, lit only by a single lantern hanging from a post. Isaac Tanner was already there, loading supplies onto 2 horses with the efficient movements of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. He looked up as Nora approached, and something in his expression lightened. "You came. I was not sure you would." "I said I would." "People say a lot of things." He gestured to the smaller of the 2 horses, a sturdy brown mare with intelligent eyes. "This is Daisy. She is even tempered and sure-footed. Have you ridden before?" "Some, when I was younger." "Good. We will be in the saddle most of the day, so let me know if you need to rest. I do not want you falling off from exhaustion." He helped her secure her bundle behind the saddle, his hands impersonal and businesslike, and then swung up onto his own horse, a tall black gelding that stamped impatiently at the delay. They rode out of Ordway as the sun broke over the eastern horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Nora looked back once at the town that had been her entire world, at the small house where her father was probably still sleeping off his whiskey, and then she turned her face west and did not look back again. The first day of travel passed in a blur of monotony and discomfort. Nora's body, unused to long hours in the saddle, protested with growing insistence as the miles rolled past. The landscape was flat and endless, broken only by occasional stands of cottonwood trees along creek beds and the distant purple smudge of mountains on the western horizon. Tanner set a steady pace, not pushing hard but not dawdling either, and they stopped only once at midday to water the horses and eat a cold meal of jerky and bread. By the time the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Nora was fighting to keep her eyes open. Every muscle in her legs and back screamed for relief, and her hands were cramped from gripping the reins. But she said nothing, determined not to slow them down or give Tanner any reason to regret bringing her along. They made camp in a small grove of trees near a stream, and Nora forced her protesting body into motion, gathering wood for a fire while Tanner tended the horses. Her agreement was to handle the camp chores, and she would fulfill her part of the bargain no matter how much it hurt. The fire caught quickly in the dry kindling, and Nora set about preparing a simple meal of beans and bacon, using the cast iron skillet Tanner unpacked from his supplies. The smell of cooking food made her stomach growl, reminding her that she had barely eaten all day. "You did well today," Tanner said, appearing at her elbow with an armful of blankets. "First day is always the hardest. How much farther to Denver? 3 days, maybe 4. Depends on the weather and whether we run into any trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "The usual. Bandits, hostile Indians, flash floods, snakes. The prairie has 1,000 ways to kill the unwary." He said it matter-of-factly without drama, which somehow made it more unsettling. They ate in companionable silence, and then Tanner laid out the sleeping arrangements. He would take the first watch, sleeping for a few hours before dawn. Nora would sleep through the night, as her rest was more important than guard duty at this point. He positioned her bedroll on one side of the fire and his on the other, maintaining a respectful distance. Nora lay down fully clothed, the wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and stared up at the stars. They were brighter out here than in town, thousands upon thousands of points of light scattered across the black canvas of sky. She thought about Timothy, wondered where he was sleeping tonight, whether he was frightened or angry or simply numb with shock. She sent a silent prayer into the darkness, asking God or fate or whatever power might be listening to keep him safe until she could reach him. Sleep took her like a wave, deep and dreamless, and when she woke the next morning to the smell of coffee, she felt marginally better despite the stiffness in her limbs. The pattern repeated for 3 more days. They rose before dawn, rode until evening, and made camp under the stars. Gradually, Nora's body adapted to the demands of the journey. Her seat in the saddle grew more secure, her hands more confident on the reins. And as the miles passed, she and Tanner began to talk, small conversations that filled the endless hours of travel. She learned that he had been born in Virginia, the son of a tobacco farmer who lost everything in the war. His younger brother had died at Shiloh, shot through the chest while charging a Union position, and Tanner had spent the years since drifting west, taking whatever work he could find. The bounty hunting had started almost by accident, when a mine owner offered him $50 to track down a worker who had run off owing the company money. He discovered he had a talent for it, and the work paid better than breaking horses or digging ditches. In turn, Nora told him about Ordway, about her mother's death and her father's decline, about Timothy's dreams of becoming a teacher, and how he would read every book he could get his hands on, hungry for knowledge that their small town could not provide. She did not realize how much she needed to talk about it until the words were pouring out of her, and Tanner listened without judgment or false sympathy. On the 4th day, they reached Denver. The city was bigger than Nora had imagined, a sprawling collection of buildings and streets that seemed impossibly crowded and noisy after the quiet of the prairie. Tanner led them to a modest boarding house on the outskirts of town, where he rented 2 rooms for the night. "We will rest here for a day," he said as they stood in the narrow hallway between their rooms. "The horses need a break, and we need to resupply before we head into the mountains. The route to Salt Lake City is harder than what we just did." Nora nodded, too tired to do more than accept this information. She entered her room, barely registering the narrow bed and washstand before collapsing onto the mattress. For the first time in days, she slept in a bed instead of on the ground, and when she woke hours later, she felt almost human again. The next day, Tanner took her to a general store to purchase additional supplies. Nora watched anxiously as the cost mounted, aware that she had no money to contribute and was therefore accumulating a debt she would somehow have to repay. But Tanner waved off her concerns. "We will settle accounts later. Right now, we need to make sure we have enough food and warm clothing to get through the mountain passes." While Tanner negotiated with the shopkeeper over the price of ammunition, Nora wandered to the back of the store, where a bulletin board displayed various notices and advertisements. Her eye was caught by a poster seeking information about escaped workers from the Pacific Labor Company. The poster listed several names and descriptions, along with a reward of $50 for information leading to their recovery. "Looking for someone." The voice made her jump. A man had appeared beside her, middle-aged and well-dressed, with a watch chain gleaming across his vest. His eyes were sharp and calculating as they took in her face. "No, just reading. You look like a girl with purpose. I can always tell. My name is Edward Morton. I am a labor agent for Pacific. If you are looking for work, I can offer you a contract with good wages and steady employment." Nora's heart began to pound. This man worked for the company that had taken Timothy. What kind of work? Domestic service, mostly. Cooking and cleaning for the mining camps or the railroad crews. It is hard work but honest, and you would have room and board included. 3-year contract, and you would earn enough to have a nice sum saved up when your term is complete. 3 years. The same length of contract Timothy had signed, or rather that her father had signed for him. Where would I be working? Depends on where the need is greatest. Could be Nevada, could be California. We move our workers around as necessary. Morton smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "You should consider it, miss. A woman alone in Denver is vulnerable. Better to have the protection of a company contract." "I will think about it," Nora said, backing away. She found Tanner near the front of the store and touched his arm urgently. "We need to leave." He took one look at her face and nodded, quickly concluding his business with the shopkeeper. They left with their supplies and did not speak until they were back at the boarding house. "What happened?" Tanner asked once they were safely in the hallway. "A labor agent. He approached me, tried to recruit me for a contract. He works for Pacific." Tanner's jaw tightened. "Morton. He is one of their most aggressive recruiters. You did right to get away from him. He has a reputation for pressuring people into contracts they do not understand, and once you sign, you belong to the company. He said they move workers around as needed. That means Timothy could be sent anywhere." "Yes, that is what I was trying to tell you before. These companies shuffle people like playing cards. Even if you find out he was processed through Sacramento, there is no guarantee he is still there." The hope that had been sustaining Nora through the long days of travel wavered. "Then how will I ever find him?" Tanner was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "There is one possibility. I have contacts in Sacramento, people who work for the labor companies and might be willing to look up contract records for the right price. If we can get Timothy's contract number from the processing facility, we can track where he was sent from there. How much would that cost? Maybe $20 for the bribe, maybe more. I will not know until we get there and see who is willing to talk. $20. Added to the cost of getting to Sacramento, Nora's debt to Tanner was growing larger by the day. But what choice did she have? "I will pay you back. I do not know how or when, but I promise I will. Let us focus on finding your brother first. We can worry about money later." They left Denver the following morning, heading northwest toward the mountain passes. The terrain grew steeper and more rugged, the air thinner and colder. Nora wrapped her wool shawl tightly around her shoulders and kept her eyes on the trail ahead. afraid to look down at the dizzying drops that appeared on either side as they climbed higher. The crossing took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of hard travel through some of the most beautiful and terrifying landscape Nora had ever seen. They passed through forests of pine and aspen, forded icy streams, and picked their way along narrow paths where a single misstep would send horse and rider plummeting to their deaths. At night, they huddled close to the fire for warmth, and more than once, Nora woke to find frost on her blankets. But there was beauty too. Sunrises that painted the peaks in shades of rose and gold, meadows filled with wildflowers, the call of an eagle circling overhead. And through it all, Tanner was a steady presence, guiding them safely through dangers Nora barely understood until they were past. She found herself watching him when he was not looking, noticing the way he handled the horses with gentle firmness, the way he always checked the camp perimeter before letting her settle for the night, the way his face softened when he thought no one was observing. He was a hard man shaped by a hard life, but there was kindness in him, buried deep but real nonetheless. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Tanner spoke into the comfortable silence. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why are you really doing this?" "I mean, I know you want to save your brother, but there is more to it than that. You could have stayed in Ordway, married some local boy, had a safe life. Instead, you are risking everything on a journey that might not succeed. Why?" Nora stared into the flames, thinking about how to put it into words. "Because Timothy is the only good thing I have left. My mother is gone. My father is a broken man who cares more about his next drink than his children. If I lose Timothy, I lose the last piece of my family that still matters. But more than that, I do not want to be the kind of person who gives up. My whole life I have watched people surrender to circumstances, let the world beat them down until they stop fighting. I do not want to be like that. I want to be someone who tried, even if I fail." Tanner nodded slowly. "That is a good answer. What about you? Why are you helping me? You could have left me in Ordway, but you brought me along. You have fed me and protected me and asked for nothing in return. Why?" He took a long time to answer, and when he did, his voice was rough with emotion. "I told you I had a brother who died in the war. What I did not tell you is that he did not have to be there. He was only 16, too young to enlist, but he was big for his age and he lied about his birthday. I could have stopped him. I could have told the recruiting officer the truth, but I was angry at him for some stupid reason I cannot even remember now, and I let him go. He died 3 months later, and I have spent every day since wondering if I could have saved him if I had just acted differently." Nora felt her throat tighten. "You cannot blame yourself for that. Maybe not. But I do anyway. So when I see someone willing to cross half the country to save their brother, someone who will not give up no matter how impossible the odds, I guess I see a chance to balance the scales a little bit. It will not bring my brother back, but maybe it will help me sleep a little better at night." Without thinking, Nora reached across the space between them and took his hand. His fingers were calloused and warm, and they tightened around hers for just a moment before he pulled away, clearing his throat. "We should get some sleep. Long day tomorrow." But something had shifted between them, a new understanding that went beyond the practical arrangement of employer and employee. Nora lay down in her bedroll that night feeling less alone than she had in years. They reached Salt Lake City in late August, 2 months after leaving Ordway. The city was an oasis of civilization after weeks in the wilderness, with wide streets and orderly buildings that reflected the Mormon settlers who had built it. Tanner secured them rooms at a boarding house run by a stern-faced woman who looked at Nora with obvious disapproval, until Tanner explained they were siblings traveling west. "We will rest here for 3 days," Tanner said once they were alone. I have business to conclude, and you can earn some money if you are willing. The woman who runs this place is always looking for help with laundry and cooking. She will pay a fair wage for honest work." The next 3 days, Nora threw herself into labor, washing sheets and cooking meals alongside the other women who worked at the boarding house. It was hard, exhausting work, but it felt good to be useful, to be earning money rather than accumulating more debt. At the end of 3 days, the landlady paid her $6, and Nora tucked the money carefully into her bodice pocket with a sense of accomplishment. On the third evening, Tanner found her in the kitchen as she was finishing the dinner dishes. "Can you walk with me? There is something we need to discuss." They walked through the quiet streets as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. Tanner led her to a small park where they could sit on a bench away from curious ears. "I did some checking while we were here," he began. "Sent some telegrams, talked to people who have contacts with the labor companies. I found out some information about your brother." Nora's heart leaped. "You found him? Where is he?" "Not exactly, but I found his contract record. Timothy Fletcher was processed through Sacramento 6 weeks ago, and then shipped to a railroad camp in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The camp is building a new spur line for the Central Pacific, and they are working round the clock to finish before winter. The conditions are brutal, and they are losing men to accidents and exposure on a regular basis. 6 weeks. Timothy had been in that camp for 6 weeks already. How do I get there? That is the complicated part. The camp is remote, accessible only by rough mountain trails. They do not allow visitors because they do not want workers getting ideas about escaping. And even if you reach the camp, the foreman would not let you buy out Timothy's contract. These railroad bosses are under enormous pressure to finish the line, and they do not care about individual workers. You would need leverage, something to force them to negotiate. What kind of leverage? Tanner hesitated, and Nora saw conflict in his eyes. There is a man in Sacramento who handles contract disputes for the labor companies. His name is Bartholomew Price, and he is as crooked as they come. He takes bribes to alter contract records, sells workers out from under their legal employers, anything to make a profit. If you could pay him enough, he might be willing to forge documents saying Timothy's contract is invalid. That is illegal. Yes, and dangerous. If you get caught, you would end up in prison, and Timothy would still be stuck in the camp. But it might be your only option. Nora felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Everything she had been taught said that breaking the law was wrong, that honest people worked within the system no matter how unjust it might be. But the system had taken her brother and was working him to death in a mountain camp, and the law said that was perfectly acceptable. How much would Price charge? Hard to say. Maybe $50, maybe more. He would want payment upfront, and there would be no guarantee he would follow through. Nora thought about the $6 in her pocket, about the massive gap between what she had and what she needed. It felt impossible, a mountain too high to climb. But she had come this far, she could not give up now. "I will find a way to get the money." How long would it take to reach Sacramento from here? 2 weeks, maybe less if we push hard. But Nora, I need you to understand what you are getting into. If this goes wrong, if Price double-crosses you or the labor company catches on, you could lose everything. Are you prepared for that risk? She met his eyes, saw the genuine concern there, and felt something warm bloom in her chest. When had Isaac Tanner stopped being a means to an end and become someone whose opinion mattered to her? When had she started thinking of him as Isaac instead of Tanner? "I am prepared. Timothy would do the same for me." Isaac nodded, but she saw the worry lingering in his expression. "All right. We leave in 2 days. That will give you time to earn a little more money, and I will send word ahead to my contact in Sacramento to set up a meeting with Price." Over the next 2 days, Nora worked harder than ever, taking on extra tasks and foregoing sleep to maximize her earnings. The landlady, impressed by her work ethic, paid her an additional $4 when they departed. $10 total. It was not enough, not nearly enough, but it was something. The journey from Salt Lake City to Sacramento took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of traveling through desert heat that sucked the moisture from their bodies and left them sunburned and exhausted. They rationed their water carefully, refilling canteens whenever they passed a stream or spring, always aware that the next source might be days away. Somewhere along that brutal trek, as they shared the last of their food and rode side by side through landscape that seemed hostile to all life, Nora realized she had fallen in love with Isaac Tanner. It happened so gradually she could not pinpoint the exact moment, but she knew it with certainty now. She loved the way he checked on her without fussing, the way he told stories to distract her from the heat and thirst, the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention. There was tenderness in those looks, and longing, and something that might have been hope. But she said nothing, because love seemed like a luxury she could not afford until Timothy was safe. So she kept her feelings locked away and focused on putting one foot in front of the other, 1 mile at a time, until finally, they crested a rise and saw Sacramento spread out in the valley below. The city was larger and more chaotic than Denver, filled with people from all over the world who had come seeking fortune in the gold fields or work on the railroads. Isaac led them to a hotel that was cleaner than some and more affordable than most. And for the first time in months, Nora slept in a real bed between clean sheets. The next morning, Isaac took her to meet his contact, a wiry little man named Sullivan who worked as a clerk in the Pacific Labor Company's Sacramento office. They met in a grimy tavern near the docks, and Sullivan's eyes darted nervously around the room as they sat down. "You want to see Price?" "You must be desperate or crazy, probably both." Sullivan's voice was thin and reedy, and he kept wringing his hands on the table. "He is not the kind of man you want to owe favors to." "I do not want to owe him anything," Isaac said calmly. "We just need him to forge some documents. We will pay cash up front." "How much cash? How much does he want?" Sullivan named a figure that made Nora's stomach drop. $100. She had 10. Isaac had maybe 40 more from his own funds. They were short by half, and there was no obvious way to make up the difference. Isaac must have seen the despair on her face because he leaned forward and said quietly, "We will figure it out. Let me think." They left the tavern and walked along the docks, watching ships unload cargo and passengers in a never-ending stream. Sacramento was a hub, a place where goods and people flowed through on their way to somewhere else, and there was money here for those willing to work for it. "I could take a bounty hunting job," Isaac said finally. Sullivan mentioned there are several escaped workers with prices on their heads. "If I could bring in 2 or 3, that might be enough to cover what we need." "How long would that take?" "A week, maybe 2. Depends on how hard they are to find." 2 weeks. Every day that passed was another day Timothy spent in that mountain camp, but what choice did they have? "Do it," Nora said. "I will find work here in the city, earn what I can. Between us, we will get the money." Isaac looked at her for a long moment, and then he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers gentle against her cheek. "You are the bravest person I have ever met, you know that." Nora felt heat rise in her face, but she did not pull away. "I am just doing what needs to be done." "No, most people would have given up a long time ago. They would have accepted the loss and moved on, but not you. You keep fighting, even when the odds are impossible. That takes real courage." So does helping a stranger cross half the country for no reason other than it is the right thing to do. They stood there on the dock, the noise and bustle of the city fading into the background, and Nora saw her own feelings reflected in Isaac's eyes. He was going to kiss her, she realized, and she wanted him to. But before he could move, a shout went up from one of the ships, and they turned to see a commotion on the deck. Someone had fallen or jumped, and people were rushing to the railing. The moment was broken, and Isaac stepped back, clearing his throat. I should go talk to Sullivan again, get the details on those bounties. You should find lodging at the boarding house we passed on the way here. It is respectable and safe, and the landlady will know if there is work available. Nora nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment that curled in her stomach. Be careful, always am. He smiled at her, that rare expression that softened his whole face, and then he turned and disappeared into the crowd. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who spoke with a thick accent and ran her establishment with iron discipline. She looked Nora up and down with shrewd eyes and then nodded. You work hard. No laziness. I work very hard. Good. I need help with laundry and mending, also cooking if you know how. Pay is $2 per week, plus room and meals. It was less than Nora had hoped for, but it was something. I accept. She threw herself into the work with desperate energy, washing mountains of sheets and clothing, mending torn fabric by candlelight, preparing meals for the dozen boarders who lived in the house. Mrs. Chen was a strict taskmaster but fair, and she quickly recognized that Nora was a willing and capable worker. A week passed with no word from Isaac. Nora tried not to worry, told herself that bounty hunting took time, but every night she lay awake imagining all the things that could go wrong. He could be injured or killed, or simply decide that she was not worth the trouble and leave her stranded in Sacramento with no way forward. But on the 8th day, he appeared at the boarding house, dusty and tired but with a satisfied expression on his face. I got 2 of them. $50 total in bounty money. Combined with what we already have, we are still short by $10, but I think I can negotiate price down. Are you ready? Nora was ready. She collected her wages from Mrs. Chen with a promise to return if she needed more work. And then she followed Isaac through the winding streets of Sacramento to a nondescript building near the warehouse district. They climbed 3 flights of stairs to an office where a man sat behind a desk piled high with papers. Bartholomew Price was fat and bald, with small eyes that glittered with avarice as he looked them over. So you are the desperate sister. Sullivan told me about you. You want me to forge papers saying your brother's contract is invalid. Yes. Nora kept her voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. It will cost you $100. We have 90. Price laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. Then you do not have enough. Come back when you can meet my price. Isaac leaned forward, his voice hard. Come on, Price. $90 for an hour's work forging a document. That is more than you make in a month at your regular job. Do not be greedy. Greed is what keeps me in business, Tanner. You of all people should understand that. Price's eyes slid to Nora, and something unpleasant flickered in them. Although I suppose we could work out an alternate arrangement. The girl is pretty enough. An hour of her time in exchange for the $10 discount. Nora felt ice run through her veins, but before she could respond, Isaac was on his feet, his hand on the gun at his hip. Watch your mouth, Price. She is not on the table. Easy, easy. Price raised his hands placatingly. I was just making a joke. You bounty hunters are so touchy. He looked at Nora again, and this time his expression was purely calculating. Tell you what. I will do it for 90, but you both owe me a favor. Nothing too onerous, just a favor I can call in someday if I need it. Agreed. It was a terrible idea, agreeing to an open-ended favor with a man like Price. But they were out of options, and Timothy was still in that mountain camp. Nora looked at Isaac, saw the reluctance in his eyes but also the acceptance that they had no choice. Agreed, she said. Price smiled and pulled out a sheaf of official-looking papers. I will need your brother's full name, his contract number if you have it, and the name of the labor agent who signed him. This will take me about 2 hours. Come back this evening, and I will have everything ready. They left the office and walked back toward the boarding house in silence. Finally, Isaac said, I do not like owing him a favor. Neither do I, but what else could we do? Nothing, I know. It just sits wrong with me. He stopped walking and turned to face her. Nora, whatever happens next, I want you to know that I am going to see this through to the end. I am not going to abandon you or leave you to deal with Price alone. We are in this together, all right. The simple declaration made Nora's throat tighten with emotion. Why? You have already done so much. You do not owe me anything more. Isaac reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that was both tender and possessive. Maybe not. But somewhere along the road from Ordway to here, you stopped being a job or a charity case. You became important to me. I care about what happens to you, Nora Fletcher, and I am not ready to say goodbye yet. I care about you too, Nora whispered, more than I probably should. There is no should about it. We feel what we feel. Isaac pulled her closer, and this time there was no interruption. He kissed her there on the street corner with the city bustling around them, a kiss that was gentle and fierce all at once. Nora's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms, and for just a moment, the weight of worry and fear lifted. When they finally broke apart, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. When this is over, when your brother is safe, I want to court you proper-like. I want to see if this thing between us is real or just a product of shared hardship. What do you say? I say yes. Nora smiled up at him, feeling something like hope unfurl in her chest. But first, we get Timothy back. They returned to Price's office that evening and collected the forged documents. They looked official, complete with stamps and signatures that would pass a cursory inspection. Price handed them over with a greasy smile and a reminder that he would collect on his favor someday. The railroad camp was 3 days' ride into the mountains, following narrow trails that grew progressively more treacherous. Isaac hired a guide, a grizzled prospector who knew the routes, and they set out at dawn the next day. Nora felt her anxiety grow with every mile. They were so close now. After months of travel and sacrifice, she was finally going to see Timothy again. The camp, when they reached it, was worse than she had imagined. Rows of crude tents and shanties clung to the mountainside, and the sound of hammering and blasting echoed off the cliffs. Men in ragged clothes moved like ghosts through the camp, their faces hollow with exhaustion. Nora's heart broke at the sight. They found the foreman in a tent that served as an office, a bull of a man named Griggs who looked at them with open hostility. "What do you want?" Isaac handed over the forged documents. "We are here to collect Timothy Fletcher. His contract has been ruled invalid due to irregularities in the signing process. We have authorization to take him back to Colorado." Griggs barely glanced at the papers. "I do not care what your papers say. I need every man I have to finish this line before winter. The boy stays." "The contract is invalid," Nora said, stepping forward. "You have no legal right to keep him." "Legal right?" Griggs laughed harshly. "Lady, we are in the middle of the mountains. There is no law here except what I say. Now get out of my camp before I have you thrown out." Isaac's hand moved to his gun. "We are taking the boy. Either you let us walk out with him, or we do this the hard way. For a moment, the tent was silent except for the distant sounds of work and the pounding of Nora's heart. Then Griggs made his decision. He lunged for a rifle leaning against his desk, but Isaac was faster. His gun cleared leather in a blur, and a shot rang out, loud in the confined space. Griggs howled and dropped the rifle, clutching his shoulder where Isaac's bullet had torn through. Anyone else want to try? Isaac's voice was cold and level, his gun trained on Griggs. No one moved. Isaac gestured to Nora. "Find your brother. We are leaving now." Nora ran out of the tent, calling Timothy's name. Men looked up from their work, confusion and hope warring on their faces. And then she saw him, thinner and dirtier than she remembered, but unmistakably her brother, emerging from between two tents with a pickaxe in his hands. Nora. His voice cracked on her name, and then he was running toward her and she was running toward him, and they collided in a fierce embrace that left them both shaking. "I came for you," Nora sobbed into his shoulder. "I am taking you home." "How did you find me? How did you get here?" "I will explain everything later. Right now, we need to go." They ran back to where Isaac waited with the horses, Griggs still cursing and bleeding in the tent behind them. Isaac helped Timothy onto the spare horse they had brought, and then they were riding hard back down the mountain trail, putting distance between themselves and the camp. They did not stop until nightfall, making camp in a small clearing far from the main trail. Timothy, still stunned by the sudden turn his life had taken, sat close to the fire and peppered Nora with questions. She told him everything, from their father's betrayal to the long journey west, from Isaac's help to the forged documents and the confrontation with Griggs. "You did all that for me." Timothy's voice was thick with emotion. "You crossed the country and risked everything. You are my brother. Of course I did." Timothy looked at Isaac, who was tending the horses. "And you, why did you help her?" Isaac glanced back at them, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Because she asked, and because helping good people is the right thing to do." But Nora saw the way his eyes lingered on her, and she knew it was more than that, just as she knew that her feelings for him had grown beyond gratitude or friendship into something deeper and more permanent. The journey back to Sacramento took 4 days, and they used that time to plan their next steps. Timothy's contract might be officially invalid thanks to Price's forgery, but Griggs would almost certainly report the incident to the Pacific Labor Company. They needed to get out of California quickly, before anyone came looking for them. "I have been thinking about heading back east," Isaac said on the 3rd night as they sat around the fire. "I am tired of bounty hunting, tired of working for people like the labor companies. I have a little money saved, enough to buy a small piece of land somewhere and try my hand at farming or ranching." "Where would you go?" Nora asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Colorado, maybe, somewhere near Ordway." He looked at her directly. "If I am going to court you proper-like, it makes sense to settle near your home." Timothy, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Our father is still there. I do not think I can go back to that house." "You will not have to," Nora said firmly. "We will figure something out. Maybe we can find a small place of our own. Start fresh." They reached Sacramento and collected their few belongings from the boarding house, carefully avoiding any contact with Price or Sullivan or anyone else connected to the labor companies. Isaac traded their horses for stage tickets, and 3 days later they were on a coach heading east. The journey home was faster than the trip west had been, but it felt longer to Nora. Now that Timothy was safe, now that the immediate crisis was past, she had time to think about the future. She had no home to return to, no money, no real prospects. She had fallen in love with a man who seemed to return her feelings, but love did not pay bills or put food on the table. Isaac seemed to sense her worry. He sat beside her on the stage, his shoulder pressed against hers in the cramped confines, and occasionally he would take her hand and squeeze it gently, a wordless reassurance that she was not alone. They reached Denver in early November, and the first snow was already falling. Isaac arranged for them to stay at the same boarding house they had used on the trip west, and that evening he asked Nora to walk with him. They ended up in a small park, bare trees stark against the gray sky, snowflakes drifting down to melt on their clothes. Isaac pulled her to a stop beneath a street lamp and took both her hands in his. "I have been thinking about this for months, and I need to say it now before I lose my nerve. Nora Fletcher, I love you. I think I started falling in love with you that first day in Ordway when you walked into my room and told me you were going to cross the country to save your brother. You are brave and stubborn and kind, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore." Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too, I have for a long time. Then marry me. Not today, not right away, but soon. Let me court you like you deserve, and then when you are ready, say yes. We will find a place in Colorado, build a life together. We will help Timothy finish his education, so he can become that teacher he always wanted to be. We will have a family of our own. I know I do not have much to offer right now, but I will work hard to give you a good life. I promise you that." "You have everything I need," Nora said, and she meant it. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Isaac pulled her close and kissed her, and the snow fell around them like a blessing. They returned to Ordway in mid-November, but they did not go to the Fletcher house. Instead, Isaac used his savings to rent a small cabin on the outskirts of town, a place with 2 rooms and a sturdy roof that would see them through the winter. Timothy moved in with them, and they spent the cold months planning for the future. Isaac found work as a deputy sheriff, using his tracking skills for legitimate law enforcement instead of bounty hunting. The pay was modest but steady, and it earned him respect in the community. Nora took in sewing and laundry, and between the two of them, they managed to save a little money each month. George Fletcher died in February, found frozen in an alley behind the saloon, a bottle still clutched in his hand. Nora and Timothy attended the sparse funeral, but neither of them shed tears. They had mourned their father long before his actual death. In April, when the prairie was green with new growth and wildflowers dotted the grassland, Isaac and Nora were married in a small ceremony at the church. Timothy stood as witness, and Mrs. Henderson provided a simple wedding cake. It was not a grand affair, but it was filled with love and hope, and that was enough. They spent their wedding night in the cabin, and Nora discovered that Isaac was as gentle and considerate a husband as he had been a traveling companion. He made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, and afterward they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking about their dreams for the future. "I want children," Isaac said, his hand resting on her stomach. "A whole houseful if you are willing. I want to give them the kind of childhood I never had, where they feel safe and loved every single day." "I want that too," Nora said. "And I want Timothy to know he always has a place with us for as long as he needs it. He does. He is family now." The following year, they managed to buy a piece of land just outside Ordway, 50 acres with a creek running through it and good soil for crops. Isaac built a house with his own hands, a real house with glass windows and a porch and enough rooms for the family they hoped to have. Timothy finished his schooling and began teaching at the one-room schoolhouse in town, fulfilling the dream that had sustained him through his months in the labor camp. He boarded with them, sleeping in a small room off the kitchen, until he met and married a quiet girl named Sarah who worked at the general store. They built their own house on the edge of the Tanner property, close enough to visit but far enough for privacy. Nora gave birth to their first child in the spring of 1876, a boy they named James. He had Isaac's dark hair and Nora's gray eyes, and he was healthy and strong. 2 years later came a daughter, Elizabeth, who was as stubborn and determined as her mother. And 2 years after that, another son, Michael, who was quiet and thoughtful like Timothy. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. The farm prospered, producing enough to feed them and sell the surplus at market. Isaac gave up his deputy position to focus on the land, though he occasionally helped the sheriff track down criminals when his skills were needed. Nora discovered she had a talent for raising chickens, and her eggs became sought after throughout the county. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable. More importantly, they were happy. The children grew strong and healthy, surrounded by love and security. Timothy and Sarah had children of their own, 3 boys who played with their cousins and called Nora and Isaac aunt and uncle. On summer evenings, they would gather on the porch, the whole extended family, and watch the sun set over the prairie. The children would run through the grass chasing fireflies while the adults talked and laughed, and Nora would lean against Isaac's shoulder and feel a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "You ever regret it?" Isaac asked her one such evening when the children were in bed and they sat alone watching the stars. All the hardship, all the risk, all the uncertainty. "Never," Nora said without hesitation. "Every moment of struggle was worth it to have this. To have you, to have our family, to know that Timothy is safe and happy. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "So would I." Isaac pulled her closer, his arm around her shoulders. "You changed my life, Nora Tanner. Before I met you, I was just drifting, doing work that made me feel hollow inside. You gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to be better than I was." "We saved each other," Nora said. "That is what love does." The years continued their steady march. The children grew and started families of their own. James took over the farm and expanded it, adding cattle to their crops. Elizabeth married a doctor and moved to Denver, though she visited often with her own children. Michael followed in Timothy's footsteps and became a teacher, taking over the schoolhouse when his uncle retired. Isaac's hair turned gray, and lines deepened around Nora's eyes, but their love remained strong. They still held hands when they walked, still stole kisses in the kitchen when they thought no one was looking, still talked late into the night about everything and nothing. Timothy lived to see his grandchildren grow, and when he died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68, it was with Sarah at his side and the knowledge that he had lived a full and meaningful life. At his funeral, Nora stood beside his grave and remembered the scared 17-year-old boy she had crossed a continent to save. She thought about how close she had come to losing him, and how that desperate journey had led her to the greatest love of her life. "Thank you," she whispered to whatever force had guided her steps all those years ago. "Thank you for giving me the strength to try." Isaac came up beside her and took her hand, and together they walked away from the grave, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, a family built on love and sacrifice, and the unwavering belief that some things are worth fighting for. On a summer evening in 1923, 50 years after that first desperate day when Nora learned her father had sold Timothy, she and Isaac sat on the porch of the house he had built with his own hands. They were both old now, their bodies worn by decades of hard work, but their minds were sharp and their hearts still beat in sync. "Do you remember the day we met?" Isaac asked, his hand clasped in hers. "Every detail," Nora said. "You were cleaning your gun and you told me I would not make it 10 miles alone. I was wrong about that. You would have found a way with or without me. Maybe, but I am glad I did not have to. I am glad you were there, Isaac Tanner." "So am I, Nora Tanner, so am I." The sun set over the Colorado prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and they sat together in the gathering darkness, hands clasped, hearts full, knowing that they had lived a good life. They had faced impossible odds and come out the other side. They had saved a boy who became a man who touched hundreds of lives through his teaching. They had built a family that would carry on long after they were gone. They had loved deeply and completely, and that love had transformed everything it touched. As the stars began to appear overhead, Nora leaned her head on Isaac's shoulder and closed her eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his presence beside her. This was what mattered. This was what she had crossed the world to find, though she had not known it at the time. Not just Timothy's freedom, but her own. Not just her brother's life, but a life worth living. And in that moment, with Isaac's arms around her and their family sleeping safely under the same wide sky that had watched over their long journey home, Nora Fletcher Tanner knew that every step, every hardship, every moment of fear and uncertainty had been worth it. Because love, real love, the kind that endures through hardship and grows stronger with time, was always worth fighting for. And she had found it in the most unlikely place, on a desperate journey across the wild American West, in the company of a bounty hunter with a good heart and the courage to help a stranger in need. Their story ended not with drama or tragedy, but with quiet contentment, surrounded by the family they had built together and the land they had made their own. It was a good ending, the kind they both deserved, and as they sat together in the warm summer darkness, they knew they had no regrets. The Wild West had been hard and unforgiving, but it had also given them each other. And that, in the end, was the greatest treasure of all.